Canada has imposed a 2-year cap on international student visas. This translates into a 35% overall reduction in new study visas. This, Canada says, has been done to deal with the ongoing housing crisis it faces, as well as to address the subpar education being given by educational institutions in Canada who charge exorbitant fees but do not fulfill the prerequisites and criteria for providing quality education to the students. Canada will also stop issuing post-graduation visa permits for students who are enrolled under public-private programs. These drastic steps will not only impact Indians who travel to Canada to study, but also for the Canadian economy, which gains significantly from international students. Now, can India leverage this situation by asking Indian students to look elsewhere at alternative, equally attractive destinations to study? This can be a blessing in disguise, even as India continues to fight the menace of the Khalistani terrorism that is rooted out of Canada, wherein cases of Indian students being brainwashed while living there have also come to fore. Let's start our conversation. Ambassador Basuti Mukherjee joining me on the telecast. And Ambassador, your views, particularly with regards to the step that has come in, where 2-year cap has been issued by the Canadian authorities on the visas for students.
Well, I frankly think, Megha, it's a blessing in disguise, as you rightly put it, because we had been trying to influence the students to look, as you rightly said, for other more attractive destinations. This 2-year cap will also help to stop the flow of students from Punjab who are being encouraged by the Canadian consulates here to move to, particularly to Vancouver, where they were being brainwashed into joining the Khalistani movement. We need to look at this issue afresh, and I'm also concerned that this measure may not last for long, because it is well known that the Canadian economy is propped up by the huge amount of money that Indian students bring into Canada. And if there is a sharp fall through this 2-year cap, maybe they would call it off, because they may think that this 2-year cap will make us request them to remove the cap, etc., which we're not going to do at all. We believe that there are much better destinations. They can look at Australia, they can look at New Zealand, they can look at Singapore. There are much better destinations, or they could be encouraged to study in India and live in India. So there are many ways of handling this issue.
Okay.
And certainly we would use this 2-year cap to encourage the students, particularly from Punjab, to look at other destinations which would be much better for them. And there is actually a very serious housing crisis in Canada, and the housing that is now available for students, foreign students, is unaffordable, and therefore they would be living in miserable conditions, cramped in dormitories, etc. It's a blessing in disguise, as I said once more, for them not to go to Canada. Megha.
Absolutely. Professor Madhav Nalapat, again, your views. How can India make the best of this situation while there are going to be a number of Indian students, because Indian students make the maximum percentage of the international students that arrive in Canada. So there is bound to be some disappointment for Indian nationals wanting to go to Canada. But how can we then change their mindset into looking at other attractive destinations, keeping in mind that there has been an open door policy for the Canadian institutions? There are more of these subsidies that are provided. There is more chance of getting into a Canadian university because of easier rules and regulations that are put in place. How should India now negotiate with other countries and their institutions to allow for more students looking at these places to study?
Megha, my hypothesis is that the government of India would have presented significant evidence to the Canadian government about what is happening in Canada. Open support to terrorism and terrorists. And I'm not going to dignify that bunch of people who are basically serving the interests of the Pakistan military with the glorious name Khalistan. They have nothing to do with any concept of Khalistan. The fact is that it is a fact that several students have been lured from Punjab and they have been given admission in, may I say, bogus universities. I mean, absolutely bogus universities. Certificates are not worth the paper they're printed on. And they stay there and stay there and study there and study there. And in the meantime, those who are fully indoctrinated, those who are close to Justin Trudeau or who are basically, in other ways, have plenty of money, including in trades which you know very well that a lot of money can be generated, but that kind of trade is not good for any part of the world, including Canada. Then they can then suddenly rise and become residents and then citizens of Canada. So this was the conveyor belt, and the beginning of the conveyor belt has in many cases been these kind of institutions. So I think, frankly, this kind of a cleanup was overdue, and I'm glad that it's happening because, in my personal view, I think the Canadians are reacting to the tremendous amount of absolutely correct, valid information. They gave us no information whatsoever. The Trudeau made allegations without any proof. We have given them significant proof that Canada has become a hub of terrorists, and frankly, this was one route for basically luring innocent people, innocent youngsters, and trying to tell them that, look, the only way you can become a Canadian citizen is to adopt an anti-India cause. And regrettably, some of them may have fallen for that. So frankly, Megha, I'm very glad this is happening. And I think, I don't know if 2 years is enough, but certainly the Canadian government needs to do a lot to ensure that this conveyor belt, this conveyor belt, if I may say so, of converting innocent minds into extremist minds is basically stopped and reversed. And one of the links in the conveyor were these so-called education institutions giving degrees, where students would just linger around and linger around and linger
Absolutely.
until their sponsors, who are basically very closely in touch with China and Pakistan, would get them Canadian residency because of the overpowering influence of China and the Wahhabi lobby in Canada.
Okay, Rajalakshmi Joshi, let's also not make this mistake of assuming that Canada is working in favor of India. It just so happens that the Canadian economy is feeling the crunch. Their economy is in doldrums. Their markets are at this point of time at the lowest low. We talk about the housing crisis that they are facing. We talk about the food crisis that they are facing. We talk about high inflation that the country is at this point of time facing, as is the case with other North American and European nations. In a situation such as this, we are talking about how the international students don't even have a place to rent. And this shows badly on the country. And it is only, a byproduct of it. And by default, what has happened is that it has become an opportunity for India to grab with both hands to ensure that the students are not lured into Canada, which is again like a hotbed of Khalistani terrorism, and to look at other greener pastures.
Yes, definitely, Megha. I was listening to all the, amazing points made by Professor Nalapat and also by Ambassador Mukherjee. So, this actually, like you rightly said, it is definitely a blessing in disguise. But and I would also like to say that definitely it is not as green as it looks, perhaps, to a lot of students. There is this wrong perception in the minds of a lot of our youngsters that maybe Canada is the green pasture that you were talking about. But even in the US and in Canada also, there is a lot of homelessness right now, and there are there is, especially after the COVID, there is this the numbers of homeless people has risen, and even in the US, even in New York, if you see on the streets, there are so many homeless people. So it's not as if everything is rosy in all these countries. So and more so for Canada, I would say that a lot of students, even not those particularly from Punjab, they would look at it as a kind of a shortcut to get into, say, maybe the US. So this is something that, a lot of people, they look at all these countries as a kind of a shortcut to probably get to the greener pastures, as you would call it. So this, I think, definitely, actually, if you look at it, Canada is right now stuck between like a rock and a hard place, you would say, where actually their universities kind of depend on all these foreign international students. And especially so, 40% of them are from India. So then they are heavily dependent on our students. And at the same time, they have this huge crunch of the housing problem, which has actually become a huge political problem also. So, and it was meant to be, because if you look at it, it's like a huge bubble waiting to burst, because they have actually gone up 75% from what they were, say, maybe 10 years ago. So a huge 75% increase in the number of students coming, and there isn't enough housing to match all of that. So it was getting into this huge bubble,
Yeah.
where the costs were rising, there was a food problem, and all of that was happening, and even for the jobs. So now a lot of these local eateries, the local retail shops, all of them, they started becoming dependent on these international students to be working in them. So,
Right.
it's a very vicious cycle where students are not realizing that it's not really as rosy as it looks. So I think that they would do better to get into other countries, and at
Okay.
the same time, I'm hoping that our country also is going to develop even better universities
Okay.
and more of them, so that our
Fair
students
enough.
don't need to go out.
Fair enough. Master Basuti Mukherjee, now the situation has come to a head where there have been a number of Indian students who are living in Canada, working part-time jobs, have been attacked. There are some students, some reports have come in that they have been killed. Now, these are acts of, racism. These are all acts of frustration, because people, when the locals don't have homes to live, they are going to look at foreign nationals who are taking their place, who are eating into their pie. And this is as much a contingency measure that has been taken by the government as it is a political move. When the food prices are rising, when the groceries are living in large percentage of taxes on foods, on the regular foods, on your staples, when you have your universities that are cramped with students, and international students for that matter, simply because you want to rake in the huge fees that you charge for international students, and while you want to fill in your coffers, you're not providing the quality education. You're providing subpar education. So an impact over here on the people who are migrating to Canada but are not being treated well. Something similar that had happened a couple of decades ago, 10 to 15 years ago, what was happening in Australia, where there would be racist attacks that would happen on Indians. And that phenomenon is also being seen in Canada. How do we safeguard ourselves from it?
We safeguard ourselves by persuading our students not to go to Canada in such large numbers and fuel their economy while being subjected to racism and racist attacks and hate crimes. The other issue is, it's important to inform the parents of the students and the students that if you're a Canadian citizen, you don't get free entry into United States. Canadian citizens, to get into United States, need a visa. There is no visa-free regime for Canadians. This is not well known in India. This should be told to them. So if they think that they are using Canada to go into an even greener pasture, which is the United States, it's not going to happen in this manner unless they cross illegally into United States and get caught. The other issue here is that we need to reform our own education system, which is extremely competitive, because most of the students who go outside, I regret to say this on national television, are those who have not been able to get admitted into the premier universities which offer world-class education.
Right.
Therefore, we need to have more universities offering that kind of education, and to make the system less competitive, so that more students can get selected through the very difficult entrance exam and get into the best institutions. And finally, Megha, it is important to remember that there are many students who come back after these so-called degrees in Canada, etc., and they are not able to get jobs because they cannot compete in India with students who have graduated and post-graduated from our premier elite universities. We
Absolutely.
are better than I myself am a product of Delhi University. I consider myself to be better than any Ivy League person. I am. I've got better education in India than I would ever get in any Ivy League. So the point here is they cannot compete, they don't get jobs.
Right.
So what are they going abroad for? That is something, again, this needs to be explained to the parents of the students, because often the parents push the students to take this route to go outside.
Okay.
It's not a question of brain drain. It's a question of looking at the better future for our Indian children.
Okay.
It's a very important issue, Megha.
Okay, all right. Professor Madhav Nalapat, now another question arises is that there is a 2-year cap that has been put. Now, this also means that the Canadian economy is going to be impacted very strongly, because there is going to be a reduction in the funds that come into the Canadian economy, because there is going to be a huge cut in the number of students, international students that bring in the forex into the Canadian economy. The question is, how long can Canada sustain this?
Megha, let me first of all say that I completely support the ambassador and Rajlakshmi, because Indian universities, many of them, including several in the private sector, are absolutely world class. Manipal, for example, has tens of thousands of foreign students, many thousands of them in the campuses in India, and many tens of thousands in campuses across the world. The fact is that we need to encourage our own universities. And I think it was because of some court case or something, or some decision, an Indian university cannot even call itself a university, a private university. It is called a deemed to be university. And many people who want to apply to Indian universities get a bit worried. What is this deemed to be university? Is it a university or not? I think, one of the good things that the government can do out of many would be to ensure that an Indian university can call itself a university and not just a deemed to be university. The second point is, Megha, I don't believe this curve is going to impact genuine students. There are some good universities in Canada, good from the point of view of mathematical and other sciences, from the point of view of humanities and all that. Unfortunately, the culture in Canada, hate your own country, hate your own civilization, hate democracies. And that is a very toxic mixture. I don't think genuine students are going to be impacted. Who will be impacted are students whom touts in some states in India incentivized to go to Canada. And once they're in Canada, they basically technically students, but they work as indentured labor in the shops and establishments run by those who are sending these touts. So the point is, this kind of situation, this kind of fake conveyor in which touts locate unwary youth in some parts of India, send them there, and then the youth are forced to work, in menial jobs, and are also subjected to indoctrination. So I'd like to say very clearly, Megha, that look, the last point I want to make, Indian students are definitely looking elsewhere. After Justin Trudeau's utter nonsensical abuse of India in the Canadian Parliament, he has made a fool of himself, and he has brought his country into disrepute. And after that, I can tell you, I know for a fact, because I'm in touch with the student community, and many of them who are looking at traveling abroad. You correctly said, parents in some parts of India don't realize Indian universities are absolutely world class.
Yeah.
They basically, the fact is they are looking elsewhere. At least 9 in 10 of such genuine students are looking elsewhere. And yes, that is going to be a heavy blow to Canada. This
Okay.
kind of coming in, this kind of cheap labor coming in, frankly, it's something that Canada should do without. And I'm glad that because of the information provided, I'm sure not only by India but by other countries, the Canadians are waking up to the fact that Trudeau has been breeding a monster,
Yeah.
looking away at
Okay.
the monster of extremism and terrorism that is flourishing in Canada.
Okay, fair enough. And I have with me Rubinder Sachdev also at this point. And Rubinder, equally perplexing for Justin Trudeau is to balance it out on the political front. While we're talking about the massive economics downturn of events in Canada, you are pulling out students, foreign nationals who are wanting to come into your country and bring in the funds to restart your economy. So that's where one of the sources of money entering into your country gets dried out. On the other hand, you're fighting this massive housing crisis, you're fighting the inflated food prices, you're fighting a massive inflation crisis that is now erupted in the country, and the elections are on the anvil. How is Trudeau going to balance it out?
Thank you. I think he's juggling, maybe a juggler like in a performance. He has to juggle. But the point is that however he may juggle, he will drop the balls. Some of the balls will be dropped, right? Which will definitely cost him a political, will have a political cost on him and a cost on the Canadian economy. As I was listening to Professor Nalapat, there are multiple aspects. Yeah, one, of course, the higher education industry. Let's look at it as an industry. I think, if I'm not mistaken, brings in about $15 to $16 billion into the Canadian economy. Now, that said, yes, there is this element wherein a large number of students who are going through the touts, who are going to shadowy kind of colleges, which offer a 1-year diploma, etc. And people know they go there, and within 6 months they're working in the local economy. By the way, that has another impact on the local economy. These students who go there work at the lowest or the bare minimum wage, whereas a Canadian citizen would not work at that bare minimum wage. We did a study and we ran the numbers. There's approximately a $2 gap between what Indian student fresh off the boat would be charging as wages working at, let's say, any business, local shop. So it'll have an impact on the local economy also in a certain way. Now, that said, it seems pretty darn difficult how Trudeau will manage all of this, because on the one hand, yes, by cutting down the numbers, okay, good students, bad students, whatever we may say, they were bringing money into the Canadian economy, right? So that with the sheer numbers going down, I think 35% or something they're talking. So that straight away chops off a certain segment of the revenue, which, by the way, also then, yes, the more this happens, the more, each country is in a competition for talent. One is the workforce, yes, and secondly, a talent, right? So if let's say the better talent slowly from India starts to not go to Canada, picks up, let's say, alternative avenues, English speaking, maybe like Australia, New Zealand. There are multiple reasons Canada has become such a hot target because of many enabling features. But slowly, if that high-end talent stops going to Canada, that's a hit on the Canadian economy and its own innovation, so to say. So there are multiple levels on this, I think, but at the same time, I think it's domestic politics and domestic economy, if not economy, politics and economy. Housing crisis is a mix between politics and economy, that he has not been able to solve the housing crisis and the prices are going so high. So I think he's not only juggling, maybe he's also caught between a cliff and a edge kind of a situation.
Okay.
Hard.
Okay. All right. Rajalakshmi, then quickly a closing comment from you. We've spoken about how India has the opportunity to leverage this situation, but I think the opportunity is only, it's a small window. 2 years' time, there could be a revocation of this order, a change in it, because at the end of the day, it is a revenue that is going to be impacted of the Canadian economy. So, at this point, how do we gain the maximum out of it? How can we persuade students in our country to look elsewhere? should we just wait for an organic transition that will happen? Because if visas are not processed, students will automatically have to look at other avenues. Can there be campaigns that can be built to push them towards countries and universities that align with India's foreign policy as well?
Yes, Megha, that's very interesting. You know, just like Professor Nalapat was saying, that a lot of students are not aware of, the simple facts. And even Ambassador Mukherjee was also, she was pointing out that, there is this misconception that once you get into Canada, you can immediately get into the US. Like I was talking about this shortcut, that so-called shortcut, it's a myth. So that, that is something that our students should be made aware of. And also another thing that I was thinking was that, there should be very specific reasons and purposes as to why the student should, any particular student should be studying in the in any other country. So it should be like, say, maybe if a particular subject is not available in our country, in our curriculum, then only they can think about all these universities. Otherwise, I think that all these foreign policies, like say for example tomorrow, if the US changes their policy about immigration, about the student visas, about and maybe Canada or Australia, so we should not be dependent on those countries to be able to give us some kind of a strong policy. Our students should know that they're only simply skilling themselves. So they may be able to face or they may be able to say maybe make their career anywhere in the world. So it should not be as if they go there depending on the fact that they study in a particular country and then they'll be able to work and say maybe migrate to that country. That should not be the thought process. It should be about gaining the skill. And that is the advice that I had given my daughter when she was also seeking education, but she wanted to do a very specific course which was not available here. So I think then, those kind of reasons would actually justify somebody studying somewhere, not as a shortcut to be able to migrate to that particular country.
Fair enough. All right, I'm out of time. I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast, and obviously we keep a close watch on these developments. And like I said, can the Indian government at this point of time use this as a leverage to then ensure that the students who at this point of time, up until now, were traveling all the way to Canada, obviously being brainwashed by certain elements, by the Khalistani terrorists that want to bring about an anti-India narrative across the globe and particularly in Canada, can be stopped. How do we do so? Let's wait and watch for the various government directives that come through henceforth.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.